23rd to order. First item on our agenda is a hearing on Senate Bill 135. David, can you give us an overview, and then we'll go to Alan after that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, good morning. Senate Bill 135 would require the Department of Corrections to affiliate on July 1, 2021 with the Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System, or KP&F. Every person who's employed as a security officer on or after July 1st of 2021 would become a member of KP&F. The determination of all benefits shall be computed on the basis of credited service under KP&F statutes, but it would only include participating service on and after that affiliation date. Any benefits earned prior to July 1 of 2021 would be determined pursuant to KPER statutes. A security officer who becomes a member of KP&F pursuant to the bill, who has a vested retirement benefit under KPERS and terminates employment with Department of Corrections prior to attaining a vested retirement benefit under KP&F, may have such service credited for the purpose of computing retirement benefits pursuant to KPERS. The members under the bill would be required to make the KP&F employee contribution of 7.15%. The bill also does contain language providing that if a security officer has a vested KPERS retirement benefit and a vested KP&F benefit and retires on or after the security officer's normal retirement date under KP&F, which is usually a little lower than regular KPERS, the security officer is deemed to be retired from KPERS on that date and can receive their KPERS retirement benefit at that same time. Security officer is defined in the bill as any person who's employed on or after July 1, 2021 as an employee of the Department of Corrections and who is in the corrections officer or juvenile services corrections officer class series, is promoted from any particular job class in that class series to position of warden, deputy warden, training technician, superintendent, deputy superintendent, various other classifications, and also those in positions within the power plant, facilities, correctional industries, food service, laundry, maintenance, operations, or anything else within a correctional institution or a juvenile correctional facility and involved regular contact with inmates or juvenile offenders. So this is kind of known as, like, currently there's a KPERS, subgroup A and B in the corrections series, and this would bring both subgroups A and B over to KP&F with the addition of the juvenile correctional workers as well in their equivalent capacity. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I can stand for questions.
David, committee, are there questions from the reviser? David, I have one. Is there a funding mechanism in the bill, or does it just fall back on KDOC's budget?
The bill does require that the Division of Budget and the governor include in their budget request for appropriations the amount that would be certified by the Board of Trustees of KPERS to, for the obligations on employer contributions under the system, and then present that to the legislature for appropriation. But it would be subject to legislative appropriation.
Thank you very much. Committee, any other questions for the reviser? See none. Thank you, David. We'll now turn our attention to Alan Conroy, who's going to give us an informational briefing. Alan, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Glad to be here. David's done, of course, it's always a good job of explaining the bill. Again, this would move those correctional officers in the Department of Corrections, which are, and there's three kind of groups: correctional officers, which are Group A, it's under the current plan. Group B, those are other staff that have direct daily inmate contact, either supervised inmates, like maybe work in food service, maintenance, those kinds of things. And then the equivalent correctional officer position in the juvenile correctional facility. So the provisions of the bill, a person who has the current membership that has service and regular KPERS, and then would start earning it in KP&F when they got ready to retire, let's say they had 10 years in capers and 10 years in KPNF, they ultimately would get a capers benefit, 10 years for regular capers, 10 years under police and fire. At the bottom of that first page of the testimony, you can see what the current retirement eligibility dates are. Most of the capers correctional officers are the only group, as they're hired in even today, they're eligible for capers 2. Otherwise, it's a closed group, and that's age 60 with 30 years of service, or age 65 with five years of service. Whoops, excuse me. The employee contribution, 6% under capers, 7.15% under KPNF. The employer contribution rate is higher. It's around 14% for regular capers, and it's at the actuarially required rate under KPNF, so it's 22.8% for fiscal year 2022. One of the biggest differences is the multiplier. Under regular capers, it's 1.85%. You remember the benefit structure, the multiplier times years of service times that final average salary gives you the benefit structure under capers 1 and 2. So that multiplier under KPNF is that 2.5 rather than the 1.85. KPNF, they're vested after 15 years, so lifetime benefit. Under capers, it's 5 years. And KPNF members have an early normal retirement of either age 50 with 25 years, age 55 with 20 years of service, or age 60 with 15 years of service. And so it gets back to that public policy in terms of when KPNF was established of having a young, vigorous public safety workforce. And so the decision was made at that time to provide for earlier normal retirement for KPNF members. And you can see on page 2 the replacement percentage. Somebody who has a final average salary, each works 30 years. Their benefit under capers would be a little over $22,000. It would be at $30,000 under police and fire. On page 3, there's just a little policy question at some point, but in terms of portability, in terms of current language in the bill, does allow kind of a special provision should a person who has capers and KPNF service to retire really under both other plans, although there have been a few exceptions going way back. Generally, they can retire under KPNF, but they couldn't start receiving their capers benefit until they reach the age eligibility requirements and capers. But again, either way works, and it's just kind of a policy consideration. In terms of the actuarial cost, by moving those correctional officers into police and fire for future service only, there would be a higher normal cost because as a group, the correctional officers are on average older than the existing KPNF members. There's no change in the unfunded actuarial liability because this is future service only. And there's a lower unfunded actuarial liability rate. Again, the liabilities don't change, but now the payroll is bigger, so you spread those liabilities over a larger group, which causes those to go down. The cost, because of the higher employer contributions, it's about $8.7 million to the Department of Corrections in fiscal year 2022. Because it's, again, that large group coming in that drives down that KPNF uniform rate. So the other KPNF agencies would save about a $1.4 million in lower rates. So the net cost is about $7.3 million. It does have also some impact on local KPNF members or employers, same way, because now the group's larger. So their rates go down as well. And there's 108 local employers, KPNF employers across the state. Again, on the CAPER side, on that actuarial cost, so the members are leaving, but that unfunded liability for those correctional officers stays with the CAPERS group. And so it would have a small impact on the CAPERS unfunded actuarial liability. It actually go down by about $44 million out of a total of $6.5 billion. The covered payroll for CAPERS State School would also go down by $120 million for those, again, those officers moving to KPNF. But again, it's such a large group, since the school group's part of that rate, it's only about 2.4%. It would only increase that contribution rate for state school by 0.23% because of paying off that unfunded liability. And there's administrative costs. We thought we're requesting one FTE position at the appropriate time. And then there's a test your eyes, or I think Suzanne got a bigger version of the document if you really want to wade through it. But anyway, just moves correctional officers from CAPERS to KPNF, higher, of course, employer contribution, but earlier retirement, the employees pay more, and they're able to retire at an earlier date.
Thank you, Alan. Just for clarification's sake, Senate Bill 135 is only state correctional officers, correct? It is not local and county.
That's correct.
Okay. Committee, are there questions of Alan? I see none. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Hildebrand.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was late in getting my finger raised, so thank you. Alan, thank you for your testimony. Just a quick question. What is the effect on CAPERS with all these people coming off of CAPERS and going into KPNF?
Right, good question. There is some actuarial costs, so that liability stays with CAPERS, even though so their past liability stays with CAPERS, so that would have to be factored in to the state school employer contribution rate. And so, I mean, the covered payroll goes down, but it's a small amount. And so the decline in the payroll increases that state school actuarial contribution rate by 0.23% to still pay on that unfunded liability.
So would that add to the unfunded liability amount to CAPERS then?
Actually, it's still there because that liability's been incurred for those officers. It just means now the Department of Corrections, which in effect would have been paying on that liability, now they're over in KPNF. So now it has to be paid. It's factored into the overall rate that the state and all those school districts apply. So,
Thank you.
Additional questions? Thank you, Alan. We'll now turn to the proponents. First up is Senator Jeff Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for hearing this bill. I really appreciate it. As you know, I have a Lansing Correctional Facility in my district. And, you know, this is a concept that's obviously come up. I don't know if you guys know, some members are new, but over the last 30 years, it's come up at least 6 times, I think. And I might have that number wrong. I'm certainly no professional in CAPERS and KPNF, so be easy on me here. But I do know my correctional officers do a yeoman's task out there. You know, this last year has been particularly hard. With COVID, we had a huge concentration of COVID inside of the prison. And of course, a couple of officers died of complications due to COVID. We had over 800 prisoners with COVID. It's a tough gig in there. It's a shame. You know, when we did the Law Enforcement Protection Act, we tried to amend that bill so that correction officers would also be protected. And unfortunately, that failed. This bill is basically the same as what Representative Jennings had introduced in 2018. It includes A and B. It's broad. There's another bill right now in consideration, HB 2111 in the House. I think it only covers A, and there is a funding mechanism inside of that that would actually put the burden, some more of the burden of payment on the officers themselves. So when I chose to introduce this, working with some of the representatives of the correctional officers, I decided to put in this broader language that includes those who have contact with inmates that may not be directly correctional officers, the A and the B, and to take the burden off of them and leave that to the state. I think there, as it stands now, after talking to some folks over the last couple of weeks, there is a gray area for those who may be in capers right now. So if we were to proceed forward with this bill, I think it would be important to give them an option to opt out of the KPNF if they want to maintain capers. So be it, have an election criteria in there to allow them the option. Because there is a gray area as they transition off of capers and maybe they're going to retire in a few years and they don't want to have to incur the requirements to stay in KPNF for another 15 years. But beyond that, this is important. This is important to consider. We think of the correction officers over the last, say, 10, 12 years. We cut the budget many, many times, and there were many officers that didn't receive pay raises for well over 5 to 10 years. And we went to hiring 18-year-olds to help supplement the workforce. There's stories of them working, 80 hours a week consistently to fill in the gap for the need to keep the operation going and keep the criminals inside of these prisons. They're a requirement. It's part of our justice system. And there was a lot of attrition. This is a retention mechanism. Mr. Conroy had mentioned, one of the reasons we have KPNF is to recognize the extreme duty that these particular state employees are put into, the extreme situations they're put into, as well as to maintain a younger workforce that might be a little bit more capable of dealing with physical situations, and to basically incentivize them to stay with us. Because when we have officers that stay inside the system, they learn the procedures, they learn the patterns, they learn how to de-escalate situations. And we need that retention. This is a small step to help with those correction officers maintain a positive, a longer-term retention policy, to recognize the extreme situations they're put into, and to really step up and recognize that these correction officers are part of our law enforcement criteria. I know there are arguments about, if we open this up to these correction officers, that we might open it up to other entities that want to enter in. But I'd ask you to look at this in isolation, look at the extreme work, and if you don't believe me, go into one of these prisons and work there for a day or two. Understand what it's like to go home and have your family afraid that maybe they're going to be stalked by people outside those prison walls. Understand what it's like to live through this on a day-to-day basis and then continue that into your private life and even after you retire. These are extreme jobs. We owe it to these officers to step up as a state. So with that, sir, I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you, Senator. Are there questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, you mentioned, and I don't think it's in the bill, about the option of remaining in capers versus moving. So that is not in the bill as written, correct?
I would say that's an oversight on my part. When I introduced the bill, I should have put in the election criteria. That is in HB 2111. That's 2111. I don't know
how many ones you had there.
I know, I don't know how many ones I had there.
Do you have any feel, or has there been a loose survey done, if you will, of correction officers to know how many may remain versus how may choose, and would it have any impact on the funding or the stability of either fund?
Well, I can't talk to stability of either fund. I think the capers, KPNF is a notoriously stable fund from the history of our our government here in Kansas. Capers, I can't really talk to that out. I think Mr. Conroy is much better talk about the stability of the fund. I will say that, anecdotally, yes, I've had a lot of positive responses that this is something that they want, okay? There are people who have concerns about transitioning out of Capers as we go through the transition process, and that's fair. In the first 10 years, I would expect there to be some people who don't want to come into it. I'll let, there's a representative from KOS, the Organization for State Employees, that might be able to address that question, but I haven't done a survey, no.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, I appreciate you bringing this forward because having served as a budget chair for corrections for a long time, I understand the situation we deal with in our corrections institutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Holscher.
The one question I have is you mentioned that the House version 2111 only covers A, whereas your bill covers A and B. Do you know what the reasoning is behind why that version only has the A?
No, I don't. I think I think the chairman was maybe a member of the joint committee or the interim committee, I believe, and maybe that came out as a recommendation or maybe it was a result of that. I'm not sure.
Additional questions? None. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll now turn our attention to Sarah LaFrance with KOS. Sarah, appreciate you being with us today. We do have your written testimony, so if you could hit the highlights of that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good morning. Can you guys all hear me?
Ian.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure, you never know. My name is Sarah LaFrance. I'm the president of the Kansas Organization of State Employees. So we do represent correctional officers across the state in all of the Department of Corrections facilities. And I would want to say thank you to the chair and also thank you to the members of the committee for having me here today. We'd also like to thank Senator Pittman for introducing this bill. We greatly appreciate that. And, hitting the highlights of this, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this and provide written testimony about the positive aspects of this for our correctional officers. As Senator Pittman talked about, the fundamental work that these folks do is incredibly important to the safety and the security of our state and the Kansans that live here. They also do very, very important work in rehabilitating folks to go back out into our communities for the ones that are able to go. This is grueling work. It's stressful. There's huge amounts of overtime. And this is also very, very specific work. It's also extremely professional work. Like, this is not just a job that people take for a year or so and then leave. This is a career. There's more than one reason why we should very seriously consider this. Like, in the last year, the level of stress on these folks with regards to the job they do anyway versus COVID has been really, really exacerbated by the situation that we all find ourselves in here. And during the 2018 session, which I think Senator Pittman talked about, the Kansas House of Representatives in several instances advanced similar proposals to the Senate. Unfortunately, the measure did not make it to the governor's desk, and our work on this matter remains very, very important. Because of the facts of this, because of what we're looking at, in order to value and put a value on what people do for families like mine and yours and the work that they do, it's going to be incredibly important to have a mechanism to both recruit and retain people from a retirement aspect. And if you look at the testimony that's been submitted by correctional officers to this committee, they touch on that, where they recognize that even if they have been there for a long period of time, it's important to ensure that recruitment and retention is there for the people that come along behind them, the men and women that will continue to do this work and to hold up, the quality of the services that we provide here in this state. I think Mr. Riddle said it really well when he's from El Dorado, when he said, I would be grateful if the switch to KPNF happened, not just for me, but for the awesome young men and women who will carry the torch long after I've left the department. And when you look at the testimony from the folks that have taken the time, out of their overtime and out of everything else that they're doing to say that, I think that really resonates. Senator Pittman had touched on, and I think Senator Peck, you also touched on the fact that, have people been polled about this? They have been polled from our members about whether or not they would like to move to KPNF. We have done that 3 years running easily. And the overarching response is we want this and we want to move. There are some questions for folks that have been there 10 to 15 years, or inside of that or a little bit outside of how that would work. And I'm very thankful to see that Senator Pittman has addressed that also in his testimony. I'm not going to sit here and read you the rest of this. I think that everyone is able to do that and take that time to look at it. And I know that the committee has very short time for valuable work. So on behalf of our organization and the members of our organizations, I urge the committee to favorably report Senate Bill 135. I thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have to the very best of my ability.
Thank you. Committee,
You're
are there
welcome.
questions? Sir, I have one. We do have some people that are not experienced with capers. Could you explain the difference between A and B employees within the correction system?
Well, the question
from-
for, are you asking me that question? I want to make sure.
I was, but if you're uncomfortable, we have other people that probably can answer it, including
I
myself.
think that the expert in the room would be Alan Conroy rather than me, although I'm more than happy to help you if I can. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Alan, can you address that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Group A would be correctional officers, so those are ones in the cell blocks, the detention part of the facility. Group B then are those non-correctional officers, but people that have daily and continuous contact with inmates. So again, it'd be like food service, maintenance people, those people. And then this bill also then talks about those juvenile correctional officers, which would be the counterpart in those juvenile facilities, the correctional officers.
Thank you for that clarification. Committee, let me call your attention to 13 proponent written-only testimonies. I show no one else wishing to testify. I also show no neutral and no opponent. So we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 135, and we will turn our attention to a very similar bill in Senate Bill 225, which is providing KPNF benefits for officers of Kansas Wildlife and Parks. David, can you give us a bill overview on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is a similar bill to what we just heard. Senate Bill 225 would provide that on July 1, 2021, the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism would be an eligible employer and affiliate with the Kansas Police and Firemen's Retirement System for membership in the KPNF for officers and employees of the department who have successfully completed the required course of instruction for law enforcement officers approved by the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center and are certified as full-time police officer or a law enforcement officer and who are employed in the parks, public lands, or law enforcement divisions within the Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. And then the department is then also required to pay the KPNF employee contributions. And as in the previous bill, the division of budget and the governor shall include in their budget request for appropriations amounts required to satisfy employer obligations as certified by the board of KPNF, of KPERS, and shall present the same in the budget submissions to the legislature for appropriation. Each officer and employee who is employed by the department on or after the entry date would become a member of KPNF. The determination of all benefits would be computed upon basis of credited service under KPNF statutes, but only for that participating service on and after the affiliation date, July 1st, 2021. Benefits earned prior to that date would be determined pursuant to KPERS. An officer and employee of the department who becomes a KPNF member who has a vested retirement under KPERS and who terminates employment prior to attaining a KPNF vested retirement benefit may have their service credited for the purpose of computing their KPERS retirement benefits. members who were employed in a CAPERS position prior to July 1, 1993, or who were in their waiting period at that time. The employer shall certify to the system the number of sick and annual leave hours each such member had at the time of the transfer to KPNF. And upon retirement from CAPERS, such member may include the leave not to exceed the amount certified in determining the member's final average salary. The bill does also require the members to make the KPNF employee contribution at the 7.15% versus, the 6% in CAPERS as discussed earlier. And I can stand for any questions.
Thank you, David. Committee, are there questions? Senator Peck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So because of the the reorg order as it relates to tourism, I'm going to guess, but I thought I would ask you, are there any personnel in tourism that would qualify as officers, or would they still remain as part of wildlife and parks? Because we're looking at moving tourism into the Department of Commerce. So would this affect any persons potentially transferred from wildlife, parks, and tourism to commerce? Or do you know? And I know that's a tough question because they have to qualify as an officer.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any within that tourism division. I mean, this one speaks specifically to the parks, public lands, or law enforcement division. The department, I don't know if the secretary is there, he might be able to address.
Secretary is here,
that.
plans on testifying, so he can probably answer that question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions? See none. Thank you. David? Alan, do you want to explain the differences between this one and the one we just heard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'll be briefer on this one because the mechanics of moving from CAPERS to KPNF are the same. The only difference is for these individuals, they could be in CAPERS 3, which is that cash balance plan for anybody that's joined CAPERS since January of 2015, which has a little different benefit structure and different, and also then retirement there is age 60 with 30 years or age 65 with 55 years. But again, different vesting period, higher employer contributions, higher employee contributions, earlier normal retirement under KPNF. The cost impact, which is on page 3 of my testimony, small, again, it's about 170 individuals, so the cost is very minimal. So if you take that group out of regular CAPERS, you're out to 0.02%, so it's only $110,000 there. Again, moving the payroll to KPNF doesn't increase the unfunded liability, makes it larger, so it decreases that unfunded actuarial liability rate by 2.6%. So the net change on an employer contribution is 0.24%. Translating that to dollars, the total cost currently for wildlife and parks then that they would pay would be $2.4 million annually. They're already paying $1.4 million for regular CAPERS. So it's a net additional dollar cost of $927,000 due to the higher KPNF employer contribution rate. Again, the KPNF gets larger, group gets larger, so the rate then for, excuse me, other KPNF employers goes down about $143,000. So the net cost to the state is $784,000 in additional employer contributions. Same thing with locals, their rate goes down because the group's bigger, so there's a little savings there, and then there's that little policy consideration as well. But this one, yeah, net cost $784,000 to the state.
Thank you, Alan. Committee, are there questions of Alan? Senator Gossage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Alan. So when you say 784,000, is that per year or what duration?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, that would be an annual cost, additional employer contribution.
Additional questions? I see none. Thank you, Alan. Committee, we will now turn our attention to the proponents. First up, we have Brad Loveless, the Secretary of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. Welcome, Brad. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see you all. Appreciate the ability to testify today. Senate Bill 225 seeks to affiliate wildlife parks and tourism law enforcement personnel, and it would be just our parks, public lands, and law enforcement personnel, no tourism folks included in this one, into KPNF retirement system. We are the ones that requested introduction of this bill. Senate Bill 225 would allow full-time law enforcement certified employees within Wildlife and Parks as law enforcement, parks, and public lands to transition to KPNF from CAPERS. Provisions of this bill would make the effective date of the bill July 1st, 2021. This change is necessary for the long-term health of the agency and will aid in recruitment and retention of these valuable public safety positions. The common pattern that we're faced with in our agency is we hire very qualified candidates who often don't have law enforcement certification. We make the investment of sending them to that school and provide extensive other law enforcement training to equip them for this really specialized type of work that they're in over their first few years. Then, after they've been with us 4 or 5 years, it's very common for the states around us to reach out to them, to invite them to come and work for them. Now that we've got them trained and made all this investment in it, these other states have retirement systems similar to KPNF. So it's very attractive for them. And early in their career, it provides a almost irresistible draw to go to other states. So we lose them to those neighbors. As the committee is aware, KPNF has a slightly different retirement benefits that encourage transition out of law enforcement at an earlier age, protecting individual officers from being involved in physical confrontations at a later age. We feel it's appropriate to add our officers to this system. So while recruitment and retention is a benefit, the underlying stimulus for us to move into this is really a safety issue, where officers at appropriate ages are able to understand the strenuous, or able to respond to the strenuous physical requirements of being a law enforcement officer for our agency. Wildlife and Parks law enforcement officers have the same statewide jurisdiction for law enforcement as Kansas Highway Patrol officers and Kansas Bureau of Investigations agents, entities that are already in KPNF. Wildlife Parks and Tourism law enforcement officers routinely assist and work closely with other state enforcement agencies and face the same daily dangers. And they work side by side, particularly in rural areas. If you're from those parts of the state, you talk to your law enforcement folks, they all back up one another because people are sparse and they need to rely on each other out there. So it's important they have the same training, qualifications, backgrounds. Additionally, it's important to note, and while Mr. Conroy pointed out that this would be funded by the state, in this case, we are not using state general fund revenues. We are a fee-funded agency, and so it's funded not by the taxpayers, but by our users who fund our agency through their license purchases. The department appreciates the opportunity to testify and request favorable decision on this bill. That I would stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Committee, are there questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I sit and listen to this, everyone has an important job. And when I look at this, I say, why? And as I say why, I'm thinking I can see other people coming up here saying, you know, the guy on the trash truck can't hop up and down because he's over 50 years old. Everybody could start making reasons why they ought to be in KPNF. And I know and this might not be for you, but it might be for Alan, but our contingent liabilities with capers, you know, if went from the red to the yellow and we put more people into this, we probably have more of a contingent liability in the future that comes into this. So this kind of crosses my mind too. So okay. I appreciate what you guys do. How often do you actually have confrontation with people?
Well, we face people with firearms every day. That's who we approach in the field. And so there's an inherent danger of the other entities that we'd like to join in this. We're a little bit unique in that during the hunting season, we approach people with weapons. And if we get crossways with them, then it's a really challenging thing. That requires mental acuity, excellent training, so they're equipped to handle those circumstances. But there's a physical aspect to this also. These folks are out patrolling. They're having to go cross-country to do their work and approach people. And occasionally, just like with the other law enforcement agencies, FBI or Highway Patrol, there's a physical aspect of the job to remain safe and to provide safety for the people that we're serving. They have to be up to that physical standard. And I certainly recognize as I get older, I'm not able to do the same things I was before. So to be safe and to perform effectively, you just have to be physically fit. You just have to. And so that's why the expectations that at 62, I'm going to be able to chase a person across a field and perform the functions I need to just are not as reasonable, not as likely that I can do that effectively as I could when I was younger. And that's why these cutoffs are in place to allow for that.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And listening to that exchange, it popped a question into my mind, so it's all your fault that I've got this question. So, on an annual basis, how often do officers with Wildlife and Parks have a physical altercation with a hunter or poacher or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't have statistics on that. I'd be glad to try to quantify it. We don't have a special category for when it had to happen. We routinely have to physically engage with people as arrests are made. That's not uncommon. The idea how often they have to sprint 100 yards across a field, I don't know how we quantify that, but it is routine that when that we have to physically handle suspects. The other thing to remember, I mean, you know what the typical interactions are with fishermen and hunters across the landscape, but as I mentioned earlier, we do provide backup very routinely in rural areas for Highway Patrol, local sheriff's department. They all work as a team. Typically, we're dispatched out of the same office, and when a call is made that an officer needs help, everybody who's available responds. And so it's in those circumstances where you can't really draw a line between our responsibilities and our training are the same, and so we're all in. We're going to do what it takes to keep those officers and the citizens safe. And so that's the other circumstance that we find ourselves in, especially in rural areas.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chairman.
Next, we have Ryan Smith, who is the president of the Fraternal Order of Police. Ryan, welcome. I am running a little bit out of time, so
I'll make it fast.
2-3 minutes.
Chairman Longbine and members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Ryan Smith, and I'm the president of FOP Lodge 59, which represents all the natural resource officers, or NROs, working for Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and Tourism. I've been an NRO personally for the last 23 years. I'm here to express my members' overwhelmingly strong support for Senate Bill 225. Senate Bill 225 transition along last all current and future NROs into Kansas Police and Fire Retirement System, or the KPNF. For years, NROs have been one of only a few law enforcement officers employed by the state of Kansas who are not included in KPNF. My members are all full-time law enforcement officers who work day-to-day statewide as law enforcement officers, very similar to the Kansas State Troopers who have long been members of this public safety retirement system. My members routinely make arrests, issue citations, testify in court, conduct in-depth and complicated investigations, partner with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies in criminal investigations, and routinely respond to emergency and disaster-related events that threaten human lives. Once more, we are unique in law enforcement that most of our encounters involve subjects who are likely armed. In the past several years, it's been discussed, or we've been discussing the need to improve our pay and benefits to make our agency competitive in the law enforcement marketplace. Presently, the law enforcement community finds itself in an unprecedented position where the number of applicants shrink when the number of vacancies increases. We are competing with other state and local agencies for these applicants, and many of our competitors offer KPNF while we currently do not. Transition to KPNF will bring us in line and equal footing with our brothers and sisters of law enforcement throughout the state. This move is essential for our agency to recruit and retain employees. FOP Lodge 59 and its members strongly support Senate Bill 225 and urge passage. Thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Ryan, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Committee, other questions of Ryan? Senator Pittman?
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the work you do on behalf of Kansas. One little piece I want to just point out, I don't think the fact that we have law-abiding citizens out there with weapons is justification for this particular program. The law enforcement work is, but just because you're interacting with folks, because we interact with folks who are armed as well. So I appreciate that it might feel like a little bit different, but any citizen can be armed these days, and that's our right. So I don't feel like that's necessarily should be inside the testimony as justifying this piece, because they are law-abiding citizens out there hunting and such. But I appreciate your effort. I'm sure you'd probably support the corrections officers going into the KPNF as well, hopefully. Thank you, sir.
Committee, additional questions? See none. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Committee, I'll call your attention to proponent written-only testimony from Representative Doug Blex, Ed Clumpy, and Mick Shanks. Have no other proponent testimony. One who wishes to testify neutral or opponent to the bill. Seeing none, we'll close the bill or the hearing on Senate Bill 225. Committee, tomorrow we are going to work Senate Bill 178, Senate Bill 245, and Senate Bill 37 in that order. And then on Thursday, we will hear Senate Bill 199, which I anticipate may take 30 minutes. If we do not complete our work on tomorrow, then we will carry that over to the second half of Thursday. I would like your input on whether you would like to work either one of the bills that we heard today. We could possibly do that on Thursday. And if we don't work expediently, then we'll have the opportunity to work on Friday. So. Seeing no other business, we are adjourned.